Let's run back through this. This is going to be a Getting Started with ComponentOne Studio for Xamarin webinar. I'm Kelly Ricker. I'm the product manager of all of our XAML ComponentOne products. Today we're going to go through Xamarin's background a little bit, the history of Xamarin, the different platforms they provide. We'll talk a lot about ComponentOne Studio for Xamarin. This is different from our old Xamarin control set Zuni. We have a lot of new features. It's much different, much better. I'm going to do a quick demo. We're going to cover getting started with Xamarin Forms and the calendar control, just to get you comfortable with how cross-platform development in Xamarin Forms works, a little bit of working in XAML, that kind of stuff. Then we're going to do something more advanced. We're going to cover FlexGrid on-demand loading in Xamarin iOS, and I'll take some questions at the end. Okay, so just to reiterate this, Mono, this is the open source version of .NET. It's cross-platform. It runs .NET on iOS, on Android, on Mac, all those places. This was developed by Xamarin. So Xamarin, that's both the name of the company and their platforms. They have quite a number of different platforms, which I'll get into in a moment here. But they provide tools for building .NET applications for these multiple mobile platforms and desktop platforms now too, really. It works with Mono, kind of works on top. The big news with Xamarin, they're acquired by Microsoft in 2016. This leads to the creation of tools like Visual Studio for Mac, which I'm going to use a lot in this webinar. Also importantly, this makes Xamarin a lot more available because it becomes just part of Visual Studio on PC. And Xamarin goes from being fairly expensive to license to just being something free that you get as a .NET developer. So Xamarin, it's cross-platform development built on Mono. We've already covered that. There's quite a number of different platforms, and this is actually just a subset here. Initially, we're going to cover Xamarin Forms. So Xamarin Forms kind of gives you this paradigm where you write code once in a shared project in C# and XAML. And this project, or this solution, you can build it out to run on iOS, Android, Windows as UWP. They're even adding new platforms now, like Linux and Tizen and Mac. So it's sort of a one-size-fits-all solution for all these different platforms. Being able to code once and hit all these platforms is quite alluring for a lot of developers. Sometimes you need something that's a little bit more tailored, though, to each individual platform. That's where Xamarin iOS and Xamarin Android sit. So at this level, you're still writing in C#, but you have a lot more access to sort of the native paradigms in terms of the tool sets, like you use storyboards on iOS and you use XML markup in Android for designing your UIs. And also you get access to all of the native API stuff too. So if you wanted to, say, use Apple's new ARKit stuff in iOS 11, you can do that in Xamarin iOS. These are very close to what you get in native iOS and native Android. They kind of sit on top of that. So as far as Xamarin goes, obviously you're writing code in C#. You can share code across platforms, especially now with Microsoft making this push towards .NET Standard. You can really share code across platforms if you write according to that spec. You can use .NET libraries available through Mono. Use Microsoft's tools like Visual Studio, obviously. And you get to develop apps for iOS, Android, UWP, and Mac. And like I said, now you can tag on, say, Tizen, Linux. They're even expressing some interest in doing WPF in the future. So this brings us to ComponentOne Studio for Xamarin. So this is our new Xamarin product that we've engineered specifically for Xamarin platforms. There's no dependency on outside libraries other than Xamarin. So this is different from our old product, Zuni. Zuni was kind of built on top of native iOS and native Android controls. We've sort of rethought this with ComponentOne Studio for Xamarin. We decided, well, wouldn't it be a better solution for Xamarin customers if we just wrote the controls in Xamarin iOS and Xamarin Android? We can just handle things like drawing and that kind of rendering ourselves. And just plug into Xamarin's own libraries where appropriate. So this brings some advantages. Like I said, our controls are written in Xamarin iOS, Xamarin Android, UWP, no native dependencies. They're high performance because we don't have that wrapper layer in between anymore. We sort of cut out a layer of abstraction that could potentially make the app both slower and more memory heavy. And here's a picture of our new controls. So we've got quite a few controls available. I've just put in bold the major control sets here. Obviously FlexGrid and FlexChart are big ones. But we have quite a number of input controls, gauges, calendar, collection view, and a couple things in our core control set as well. So ComponentOne Studio for Xamarin, it is similar to Zuni in that we do app-based runtime licensing. The licenses are generated on our website or in the License Manager add-in for Visual Studio on PC. So I'll show how to do it on the website here in a little bit. Our controls are available for several Xamarin platforms. For Xamarin Forms, we have iOS, Android, and UWP support. And then we have controls purely for Xamarin iOS and Xamarin Android. So today I'll cover some Xamarin Forms development in Xamarin iOS. So as far as the new features that we get in this new platform, we've added UWP support. This is different than what we had in Zuni, where we just had support for Windows Phone 8. So I think UWP is a lot more important, even though that's becoming more of a just pure desktop platform in a lot of ways. I still think developers want this out of Xamarin Forms. Another big feature that we've added designer support. So what do I mean by this? The controls support GUI-based layout and design through Xamarin iOS and Xamarin Android. So I'm talking about being able to design the controls and configure the controls in storyboards and in XML. We also support the Xamarin Forms XAML previewer for getting immediate visual feedback. So Xamarin Forms doesn't have a full-blown designer. They have the XAML previewer, which is handy because you can basically build your code once and make changes in XAML and it's immediately previewed. So this is something Xamarin is continually working on. We're continually working on it. Just a quick picture to kind of show the differences here. But it's a good tool. Especially with Xamarin Forms, where you have multiple projects that you're dealing with within your solution, not having to build every time you make a change, to see the visual change is quite handy. So performance is another big distinguishing feature in this release. Our new design yields much higher performance potential. Like I said, we've eliminated that native layer, that wrapper around that, so we gain a lot over Zuni. There's also better compatibility going forward. So, in this case, because we're basically written in Xamarin, as their platform improves, we're going to get those improvements as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about FlexGrid here because it's the control that's probably the most sensitive to performance changes. There's this load and render test that we did. All this really measures is the time after we set the item source to the actual appearance of the control on the screen. And this is in Xamarin Forms. So this is basically, the moment you give data to FlexGrid, how long it takes from that moment to actually visually display it. So you'll see here at the bottom, I just charted this out. This just compares the new C1 control to our old Zuni controls. And, because the platform's so much more efficient, because it's virtualized so much better, because it does cell recycling, all of that, you'll notice here that the performance compared to Zuni is quite drastically different. Now, around 10,000 rows on iOS, sure, it's quite a bit faster, but you'll notice as the number of rows actually increased, for C1, it's relatively flat. Because it's so heavily virtualized, it's really just worried about those cells that are going to be in view, and a little bit outside of the viewport. Compared to Zuni, which is trying to load everything here, much more memory intensive. It's just quite drastically faster. You'll see on Android too, the performance is quite noticeably different. In fact, you can actually handle much higher numbers of rows now than you could in the old platform. So if you're interested in this, I actually have a blog up on the website that goes into even some other performance numbers and really highlights this in a deeper way. So I'd recommend checking that out. So continuing with new control features, we'll actually talk a little bit about a few specific control features here. So FlexGrid, we gained a lot of features. Incremental loading's much improved. Basically use the right type of collection view. You get on-demand loading sort of automatically. I'll show this a little bit later. We added pull to refresh in Xamarin iOS and Xamarin Android. It'll be in Xamarin Forms 2 in the next release in about a month. Multi-level grouping, we can finally handle nested groups, which is a feature a lot of people have asked for over the last couple of years. And we added zooming to the flex grid. So collection view, we made a couple of changes as well. We've added .NET Standard 1.1 support, so even though we kind of build this as a Xamarin control, this .NET style collection view, it actually could work in a number of different types of projects. So we're proud that as time goes on, we're going to be focusing more and more on the non-UI stuff complying with .NET Standard, just because we think reusable controls and code is great. Beyond that, in Xamarin iOS and Xamarin Android, we added libraries to let you natively connect to the UI table view and recycler view in iOS and Android respectively. So this is nice if you're not really into the whole paradigm for populating these controls that you get natively, and you want to do something a little more .NET style. You can just plug your data into the collection view and basically feed it one of these controls, the table view or the recycler view, and get a much more .NET style experience with these native controls. Okay, so I'm going to do a quick Visual Studio demo here. Let me get out of PowerPoint here. Before we go too far, like I said, I'm going to be using Visual Studio for Mac. You can get that from Microsoft's website, so let's pull that up just on visualstudio.com here. I'm also using iOS pretty heavily today, so as far as getting what you need to develop for iOS, just download Xcode from the App Store. You'll get the most recent iOS SDK, which is 11 now, and I believe Xcode 9 is now the most recent version as of a couple weeks ago. And you can get the installer for our controls here on the grapecity.com website. Our controls are all NuGet based, which I'll show in a moment here, so you can also just pull them down from NuGet.org as well. So let's minimize this. I'm going to open up Visual Studio for Mac, and I'm going to go ahead and create a new solution. So go to File, New Solution here. We're going to start off with Xamarin Forms. So you see under Multi-Platform we have these templates available to us. We're just going to do a blank Forms app. I believe the Forms app now has some other ASP.NET Core Web API stuff, which I'm not too concerned about. So we'll just start with a blank app. I will name this New C1 Calendar. And I'm not too worried about the company name. You'll see you can pick which target platforms you want. Also, you can change how you want to share code. You can either use a PCL, a portable class library, or a shared library. I wouldn't be surprised if in the future they add or maybe replace portable class library with .NET Standard library. I know Xamarin Forms actually just added support in 2.4 for .NET Standard, so that should be in the future too. Okay, so everything looks good. We'll go ahead and create a project. So sometimes this can take a little bit. The Xamarin Forms solutions actually contain multiple projects, which you'll see here. Now on a Mac, it's just going to create your PCL, your Android project, and your iOS project. All of our code will live in the PCL basically. You can do more platform-specific configuration for Android or for iOS in these projects. I'm not really going to get into custom renderers and that kind of thing, but if you want to build out some kind of control behavior that's really specific to Android or iOS, or really takes advantage of those native APIs, you can write some code in those platform projects to accomplish that. So I'm going to go ahead to the PCL here, and we are going to add some ComponentOne Xamarin NuGet packages. So you'll see here, I'll right-click it, I can go to Add, and we'll go to Add NuGet package, or packages. So I'm on NuGet.org, I'm just going to search C1 Xamarin, because I know this will get me to where I want. So we're going to be working with a calendar control for this sample. So you'll see down here C1 Xamarin Forms Calendar. I'm going to go ahead and select that and hit Add Package. So this is going to add the appropriate packages to my PCL. So one important thing if you're working on Visual Studio for Mac versus Visual Studio 2017 or 2015 on PC, the way the NuGet Package Manager works is a little different. So you can do a solution-wide package add in Visual Studio on PC. On Mac, you have to do it per project. So, I've added those packages into my PCL, but I'm also going to have to add them to Droid and iOS. So it's a little bit of a pain. Hopefully Microsoft improves this at some point. So I'll do that in a moment. Just to point out before I move on, we've added this calendar control. We've also added the core control here. That's just the base class. It defines a lot of the control behaviors for all of our controls. Okay, so I'm going to click on the Android project. Once again, I'm going to hit Add NuGet Packages. You'll see here topmost is the calendar control again. I would add package. Once again, I'm just going to show off that if I go into packages here, you'll notice I added calendar, core for Xamarin Forms. Also, I added this Android calendar and Android core library. So that's actually where the control lives for Android, or when we get to iOS for iOS, you'll see a similar complementary package there. Xamarin Forms basically communicates through the renderer with these other packages on the native platforms. So Xamarin Forms kind of defines the behavior across platforms, and then you have individual implementations for each platform as well. So I'm going to go ahead and finally add these NuGet packages to iOS. Select the same package, hit Add Package. Okay, so that's added. Let's go into the XAML here. And I'm going to show off a little bit of what we have in terms of the Xamarin Forms previewer. Let me go ahead and build. One thing about the previewer, you do have to build your solution once before things start showing up. So I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. And I'm going to tell High Sierra that I don't want to go on a tour as well. While I'm waiting for this, I might as well add the namespace for the calendar control. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type XML and S. I'm going to set cal as my namespace. And then we will feed it the name of our assembly that we just added, the NuGet packages, which is first CLR namespace, as always, c1.xamarin.forms.calendar, and then assembly equals the same name. Well, you see here the previewer came up for Android. There we go. Now it comes up for iOS. I'm going to remove this label. I'm not too interested in this right now. So let's actually add a calendar control to this. First, I'm going to add a stack layout, which is just a layout container in Xamarin Forms that basically will fill up space in a line, either vertically or horizontally. Inside that, I'm going to put calendar control. You'll see IntelliSense here is already bringing it up for me. And let's do vertical options, fill and expand, so it fills up the container. And you'll see in the previewer here, I already get a little bit of feedback. You see the calendar control appears. So let's go a little further with configuring this. Let's change the background color. And I'm going to pick a color that I already have in hex here, just because the built-in colors are a little too loud for me. So we'll set a gray background. Let's configure some fonts too. So rather than type this out, I already put this chunk over here. All this is basically setting different font families for the control. Changing some colors around. You see the styling sort of warps here. Let's pull up Android and see if we get the view yet. So sometimes Android takes a little while to load up. So there we go. We get something similar in Android and iOS now. And this is without even running it in the simulator at all. This has just been, basically through building the code here, and then just changing some XAML around. So let's actually try to run this. So one thing I'm going to do before we do that is in the app delegate here. So in the iOS project, in the app delegate, I'm going to initialize the ComponentOne Xamarin calendar control. So this is just a way to tell native iOS that we need to keep track of the renderer from Xamarin Forms. So that's why you see C1 Xamarin Forms calendar, C1 calendar. Oops, actually I want not C1 calendar, but platform, iOS, C1 calendar renderer, and then init, which initializes it. And that's just telling native iOS that, hey, this bit of code related to Xamarin Forms, make sure you hold on to this when you run the app. Make sure you initialize this. One other thing before I run this, I haven't done anything as far as licensing goes. I know earlier I mentioned that we use runtime licensing for the ComponentOne Studio for Xamarin controls. So when I run this, you'll see what happens here. Okay, so we get a message here about the license, saying that the license key is invalid or missing. Directs you to our website. So because I haven't added any kind of key to this, at runtime it'll fail. So let's go ahead and let's stop this. I'm going to show you guys how you can generate a license on our website. So if you go to grapecity.com, if you go into Support and Learning, there's a licensing tab here. So if I go through here, you'll see there's a specific link for licensing your Xamarin app. I'm going to go to Generate an App Key now. So you can either generate evaluation keys or full license keys. So if you've bought the product and you have a serial code, you can register it on the site and generate these license keys at will. That'll be good for the product in perpetuity, but for new versions within the year. The evaluation keys, they're good for 30 days. So I'm going to go ahead and do that for the purpose of this. So we're going to select evaluation, and this is going to be for Xamarin. The UWP and ASP.NET Core use a similar scheme. So this app name box, this actually corresponds to something in our project. So if I go back to the PCL here, I'm going to hit Options, or be Properties in Visual Studio on PC. This default namespace, New C1 Calendar, this is what I want. That's going to be the app name for us. So go here, I'm going to generate the app key, and it's going to give me a very long string. So I'm going to take that, and I'll copy it. I'm going to go back to my project. So I'm going to go into the PCL here, this app.xaml or app.cs, depending on what your project type is. I'm going to go into the code behind for this. So in the constructor for your app, right here, we're going to add C1, Xamarin, forms, and this is in the core. You'll see there's a license manager object here that takes a key, and I'm going to set that equal to this very long string. And now we will rerun it. And hey, we get a different pop-up here. It says the app was built using an eval key. You have 30 days remaining, so hit OK. Now as for the calendar itself, you'll see here you've got selection. We have different forms of navigation. Right now the orientation is set to horizontal, so it goes horizontally through the calendar months. You can set it vertical as well. But anyway, I just wanted to show a little bit of Xamarin Forms, the previewer, just how you could get started with a simple control like calendar. Let's actually close this. I want to do something a little more advanced here. We're going to open up this FlexGrid example code. So this is a Xamarin iOS project that uses FlexGrid and collection view. So right now the project just has a collection view added to it. I've done a little bit of work here, sort of ahead, just to set up this My Collection View class, which is a type of cursor collection view. So what I'm going to show off in this project is not only Xamarin iOS, but a little bit of how you can get on-demand loading, pull to refresh in the FlexGrid, how you can use the cursor collection view for on-demand loading. So this My Collection View class, I've set this up to basically simulate, it does do on-demand loading. It's just generating random data. A better use case for this would be something with, some REST data or something on the other side, something using a web API. But for the purposes of this, it's basically going to have a page size of 50 items. So for FlexGrid, this is going to correspond to 50 rows. As we, get towards the bottom of a page, you'll see it'll get another page asynchronously with this task here, get page async. It runs this task that's basically going to generate more items. Customer is just a class I have for dummy data. It'll generate another 50 rows of data, and then it's going to return it. So I haven't added FlexGrid to this yet. I wanted to show a little bit of how that works because the NuGet packages are a little different. So once again, we're going to go to Add NuGet Packages. Because this is Xamarin iOS, there's just one project here in the solution. It's not like Xamarin Forms where you have several. So I'm going to go to FlexGrid, and we're going to get C1 iOS Grid. This is the class we want. Let me go ahead and add this package to our project. Okay, so it's successfully been added. I'm going to go to our storyboard here. So storyboard is like, I kind of alluded to this earlier. This is the way in native iOS you can create UIs. And it's not just a matter of designing like a single page via GUI. You can actually wire up navigation and that kind of thing through a storyboard. So right now it's just this one blank view controller. That's all we have. You'll see on the right here there's a toolbox with other types of view controllers, other native iOS objects, that kind of stuff. If I scroll down to the bottom here, now that I've added that FlexGrid library to our project, you'll see I get some other custom components, the checkbox, which is coming from the core, and FlexGrid. So I'm going to go ahead and drag a FlexGrid onto our view controller here. I can select it. You'll see here now there's some properties available to us down on the bottom, which I can configure here if I don't want to write any code. I can also position this in space on the storyboard itself. So I'm going to go ahead and worry about that. I'm going to take this pin and I'm going to drag this over to the right. And this is basically going to set a constraint, which constraints are basically the way that iOS handles positioning, growing and shrinking of controls, that kind of stuff. So what I'm doing is I'm setting the flex grid equal to the height of this view. I'm going to drag the bottom pin down the bottom guide here. Now I'm doing the same thing with the width. And this top pin, I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to drag this to the top layout guide. So this one is dictating position, not the way the controls going to size itself. So I will go to my document outline here on the right, and this tells you what's in the view controller. You can see the main view that everything sits in as far as a container goes, the flex grid itself, and then the constraints that I've just put on it. So like I just described, the flex grid height is equal to the view height, the flex grid width is equal to the view width. I'm going to change the spacing. I don't really want it offset from the top. I would rather this be 0. I just want it to hug that top layout guide, so it's not writing over top of where it says the carrier and Wi-Fi and battery. Okay, so now that I have that configured, let's go to the view controller. Oh, actually one other thing I want to do before I move on. Because I'm going to interact with this in the view controller, I would like to give this a name. I'll just call it grid. And I'm going to control drag from here down to the view controller just so that they're attached to each other. So now when I go to the view controller, let me uncomment this. I already put in some code for the license manager. I didn't think you guys wanted to see that again. So I'm going to type here, you'll see in IntelliSense, I get the same grid I was just working with for the storyboard, and I'm going to set my item source equal to a new instance of my collection view, which is that class that I created elsewhere for on-demand loading. So let's go ahead and let's run this. I haven't really done too much configuration yet. I'll show a little bit of that through the storyboard in a moment here. Okay, so you'll see here's our flex grid. It's filling up the screen. It's not writing over top of where the carrier and the time and the battery is. If I scroll down, you'll see I'm getting close to 50 items. I hit 50 items, and it actually resets. The way the customer class is set up, it just starts over at 0, so it makes it really easy to see, when we're loading more data. So if I go back up to the top of this control, because this is just generating new data every time, I can simulate pull to refresh by pulling here, and you should see it load in some new names: Steve Orsted, Herb Frommer, Steve Jammers, all terrible names, but they're new every time. Using that cursor collection view, creating your own version of it, that's really all you have to do to get this kind of functionality. So let's stop this for a moment. I'm going to go back into the storyboard and just configure a couple of properties here, just to sort of show off how you can do that. So you'll see here, you have a lot available to you as far as the properties you can configure. Say we want to freeze that first row, we can make this, or that first column, excuse me, I don't really want to freeze any rows. We'll freeze that first customer ID column. Let's see, I could change the alternating row background color here, just to give this kind of a two-tone look, make it kind of a lighter blue. We'll change the alternating row text. I'm going to make this white against that too. And I can even change the text color to be something blue as well on the other rows. So you'll see here, I mean, we have a lot available to us, just through the properties here with a completely code-free approach. I should go ahead and rerun this. You see here, we've now frozen that first column. We have alternating row colors, different text colors, and this was all without writing any code. So go ahead and stop it. And the option's always available to you too. If you'd prefer to just write C#, you can always come in here, and actually set properties in the code behind. Okay, so with that, let's wrap up the demo here. Go back to our slides. So looking towards 2017 V3, we're about a month off of our next release, so I'm just going to preview a few things that are coming here. So for FlexGrid, I already mentioned this, pull to refresh will be in Xamarin Forms 2. There'll be a refreshing event along with it, but as far as implementing it, it looks a lot like what I've done here in Xamarin iOS. You just have to use a cursor collection view and you get that functionality as far as on-demand loading and pull to refresh. We're adding a new add new row function, so you can just inline add rows, and column reordering should be coming to the FlexGrid as well. Our input controls, anything that's inheriting from drop-down should have a new improved full screen mode. This handles much better actually scrolling your input above the keyboard whenever you're doing editing. So this should be a much better solution just for working with input on mobile generally, I think. FlexChart, we're adding a lot of different customization improvements, annotations, line markers, panning, zooming, custom chart elements, tooltips, all that stuff will be coming back in FlexChart in about a month. We're adding new sunburst chart type. We'll have a whole set of samples along with that, as well as a periodic table sample, which we feature that on a lot of other platforms. For collection view, we're adding some new editing features. We actually should have a sample that combines FlexGrid and collection view with a SQLite database, which shows really easily with minimal code how you can set up your collection view with the SQLite database and use FlexGrid to add new data to it, to edit it, to delete stuff from it. So it'll be good stuff. Also, we're going to be adding kind of experimental Xamarin Mac support for the collection view. We've got a set of samples for this. This is just sort of to get this out there. I'm kind of curious, what you guys think actually of adding Mac support into the controls. It seemed like a good place to start. And there's other stuff I'm not listing here too. We should be adding some new samples outside of this, some new project templates, so you don't have to mess around with the custom renderers and stuff to the same extent. So we have a lot of stuff coming. So do you guys have any questions about anything that we've covered? So we will be providing a video of this after the fact. We should have a blog that basically is a summary of this that has the slides as well as a video, which we'll probably embed from Vimeo. Like I said, as far as 2017 V3 goes, that's about a month off. That should land in mid-November. Okay guys, well I'm going to go ahead and wrap up then. Just a couple of things here as far as staying in contact with us. You can follow us on Twitter at GrapeCityUS. You can check out our blogs on grapecity.com and blogs. There's some good stuff there, especially if you're curious about FlexGrid. Like I said, we've got more performance analytics there, more features about all the different features that we added in past releases. If you have feedback for us, feel free to go to our forums. Also, we have a user voice where you can submit suggestions for new features. So you can always do that in the forums as well. And finally, I'll plug my white paper, filling in the gaps, how to build custom controls in Xamarin Forms. It's available on our site. If you're curious about some stuff that I just kind of breezed through as far as custom renderers, writing code in platform projects, even the difference between Xamarin iOS, Xamarin Android, Xamarin Forms, and what you get natively, we cover that at pretty great length in that white paper, so check it out.